Hey, Sven here. As a Mac developer, have you ever wondered how best to document your scenarios, especially when you need or want to deliver documentation along with the scenarios to your clients? Then I have something for you today. I've built a scenario that lets you document your scenarios with text, diagrams, and so on. And I'll show you how it works right here in this video. I'm Sven, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been working on process optimization and quality for over 33 years, not just in business, but in all areas of life. And much of what I know today, I've learned through experience and trial and error, and I know what really works. And in my videos, I want to show you how you can use intelligent process automation profitably for yourself and your business. And if you're not quite sure where to start, or if you need support, just book a free call with me. You'll find the link for that right below this video. So let's get started. When I build a scenario like this, it's sometimes really important that another developer, for example, understands what you've done, how everything works, what the process is, and so on. You can see most of it visually in Make, but there are still sometimes certain details that are important. And besides, I also want to occasionally read a document that explains how something was built. I have a very concrete example here. We have a scenario where we generate images using Flux and various Flux models. And this scenario is set up as a sub-scenario, so I can reuse it like a component in other scenarios. By the way, that's also a feature of our AI toolbox, ITO, where we build different scenarios, which we build once and can then use again and again. And for that, we also create the corresponding documentation. And that looks like this, for example. Here I have the title, which is the name of the scenario. Then I have the date when this documentation was created, a description that is automatically generated here. A short description in case you use the model or scenario in an agent context, so that the agent knows what this thing is actually capable of. Then all the input variables, which come in either via a webhook or through the scenario's inputs, along with a description. The outputs, meaning the result of the scenario, any remarks that might be relevant, and then a flowchart and a sequence diagram that show what happens here and how it is structured. And at the end, there's also a link directly into the scenario. And that's obviously extremely helpful because now you can just take the document, give it to someone else, and they can look up what's inside. So how did I do this? I built a scenario here that, wait, I need to switch over to Airtable first. I have an Airtable here, and in this Airtable, I enter some data. I specify the name of the scenario I want to document. I upload the blueprint, and I also enter the link for the scenario here, specify which language I want the documentation in, so for example DE or EN, and then I click on Create Documentation. In this specific case, what I want to show you live now is that I have a component here again, which is used to transcribe a video. That means the data is extracted from the video and then formatted nicely here. And then the transcribed text is returned. And to create this documentation now, I have entered the title here, uploaded the blueprint, the scenario, the link to the scenario, and now I click on Create Doc. Then our automation starts running, and when it's finished, we'll look back at the table here and see what happened. It took about 2 minutes for the documentation to be completed. And what we get here as a result is the link to the document. That means I can simply click on it here and I'm taken straight to the document. And what we don't have here yet, or not yet, are the diagrams. The reason why these diagrams aren't included here right now is that, unfortunately, creating the flowchart via automation doesn't work very reliably at the moment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe I'm just too clueless to do it right, and maybe one of you knows a better way. We'll talk about that again in a moment. So how does the whole thing work? So I get the record ID from Airtable via the webhook, and then I read the data from that row. Of course, that's not particularly complicated. I simply take the record ID here and use get a record to download it. I download the blueprint document, meaning this JSON document that comes out of it. And then I wrote a reprompt here, which I used to read the blueprint and format it accordingly, all in Markdown format, so that it's easy to read later. And then I have a second step. In a second step, I then created the generation of a mermaid code as a prompt. Mermaid is a standard format that you can use to create flowcharts, sequence diagrams, and much more. There are also the appropriate tools for that, which I'll show you in a moment. And here you can see it. You analyze a blueprint and return two mermaid diagrams, namely a flowchart and a sequence diagram. And then there are the corresponding instructions on how to interpret it and how to structure it. I developed this whole prompt step by step with ChatGPT, so I gradually approached it, making sure all the errors were eliminated in the end, and now the mermaid code is generated from the JSON document, and then returned. And actually, yes, and this code, that is this text, I then insert here into such a document. So that means the description, the agent description, the inputs, the outputs, the remarks, all of that goes in here. And here I actually just have this placeholder image here. And then I create it as a Google Doc and enter the data into Airtable. And now comes the crucial point that I have in here, namely that by uploading via https mermaid.inc/svg and then the base 64 string, I normally get the diagram back if it works. And I can then, for example, upload this diagram to Cloudinary, and I run this whole process twice. Unfortunately, this does not work reliably. That means you often get a 400 response here instead of a 200. And there's absolutely no way to tell when it works and when it doesn't. That's why I then, even though I left this in the scenario for now, let's just take a look at what happened during this run. And lo and behold, it went into the error route, which means we have the flowchart diagram here, and we get a 404 as a response, sometimes a 400, sometimes a 404. And of course, the upload doesn't work here either, meaning here in wallet image file. But you can see the general idea behind it, and that's why I built the solution differently afterwards. And that's simply this flowchart code and also the sequence code. I just loaded them into Airtable here. And then I copy it out from there. This is really important here. I don't know if you know this, but when you copy the content out of Airtable here with Ctrl+C, it replaces the single quotation marks, that is, the quotation marks, with double quotation marks. That means it doesn't work. That's why you absolutely have to go into the editor here, select everything, and then copy it with Ctrl+C. And then it works properly. Then you go into a mermaid system like this, where you simply paste the code into this editor, and then the diagram will be displayed here immediately. Then you go to export, PNG is fine, or SVG, which can of course be scaled very well. Export the whole thing, and then you go into your new document, insert, image, upload, and now I have my flowchart right here. Yes, and I do the same with the sequence diagram as well, but we'll skip that here in this view. Yes, this way I just have a cool documentation of all my scenarios. And yes, maybe this will be useful for you too, and maybe you can use it for yourself as well. Take a look at it, think about whether it can be improved. And if you have an idea of how this function works correctly here, namely with mermaid.inc, then of course I would really appreciate your feedback and your approach to how I can get this running reliably. Thank you and see you next time. Bye.